Juneteenth celebrations are underway in Boston and across the country this weekend, commemorating the day enslaved people in Texas gained their freedom more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Good afternoon, I'm Karen Holmes Ward. The Museum of African American History in Beacon Hill has produced a documentary called Jubilee, Juneteenth and the 13th with actor Hill Harper, uncovering some of Boston's hidden history and connections to emancipation. Here's a look.
The first abolitionists whose centuries-long fight for freedom and equality intensified during the antebellum and Civil War years in Boston and accelerated with the Emancipation Proclamation and 13th Amendment. Harper meets acclaimed historians who fill in missing pages of the American narrative. Dr. Carrie Greenidge, author of Boston Abolitionists.
Some people have had this mistaken idea that abolitionists were white people who were out to rescue and save enslaved African Americans. And really, abolition comes from enslaved people themselves who free themselves. It comes from black people who lived in places like Boston.
Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson, author of Force and Freedom, Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence.
One of the favorite stories I love telling about Lewis Hayden is the kegs of gunpowder that he allegedly kept in his home so that when slave catchers, approached his doorway looking for fugitive slaves, the idea was you can leave in peace or you can leave in pieces. And I think, and he meant what he said. No one was willing to call his bluff, but it just shows how committed he was to using force and even deadly force and violence to make sure that black people found their freedom.
And Dr. Annette Gordon Reed, author of On Juneteenth.
The end of chattel slavery was important, and the end of it with the efforts of black soldiers too. I mean, that's the other thing about it, that the Union Army, the United States Army, was able to be successful with the infusion of blacks who were fighting for their rights. So to have this day come after the defeat, the total surrender of the Confederate Army, I think it's a good way to commemorate that.
The abolition of slavery in the United States was not just one day. It was a long process, centuries in the making.
Jubilee, Juneteenth and the 13th is a production of the Museum of African American History with funding provided by Liberty Mutual Foundation, Massachusetts General Hospital, and Harvard University. And joining us now is the museum's new president and CEO, Dr. Noel Trent, and Christian Walks, Director of Education and Interpretation Programs. Welcome to you both. Noel, tell us about the exhibit that's opening at the museum. It's called Emancipation Proclamation, A Pragmatic Compromise. What insight does this exhibit offer for visitors?
I think for a lot of people, there's this common held assumption that President Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation and then poof, everybody's free. And what this exhibition does is it really unpacks the truth behind that this was a strategic military maneuver by President Lincoln. It was something that he was not really willing to do until the Union forces had made some more successes in the war. And we also talk about how black people were freeing themselves. No one's waiting for a soldier. If there's an opportunity in the chaos of war to free yourselves and get your family free, then people are taking part of that. And so this is an opportunity for visitors to come and learn just how complex this idea of freedom and emancipation truly is.
And clear up, if you would, the historical confusion around emancipation in Texas. It's not that they discovered that they were free.
It is when General Gordon Granger, when he arrives in Galveston Island, he reads the Emancipation Proclamation. And so they are aware of the official notice. And that happens on June 19th, 1865, 2 years after the surrender of Appomattox, which is where we regard it as the official end of the war. But remember, information doesn't travel as quickly as it does today. So it does take about 2 years for certain information in the chaos of war to get to places like Texas and to say that the war is ended. There's this new rule in the country.
Okay, Christian, describe, if you would, the role of abolitionists in Boston and how this city became a hotbed of the anti-slavery movement. Talk about that and the role of Frederick Douglass.
Sure thing. And so Boston really established itself as a hotbed of abolitionism in the 19th century. But this really dates back to an earlier history when Boston, you have folks like Prince Hall, Phyllis Wheatley, who are occupying Beacon Hill. But really in the 1780s, that's when Beacon Hill becomes a home for the Black community. Slavery is effectively abolished in Massachusetts and deemed unconstitutional. And so in 1783, folks are seeking refuge in places like Massachusetts. And so by the time you get to the 1820s and 1830s, you have folks who are active in the community, like James Barbados, David Walker.
And we're just looking at wonderful pictures of Frederick Douglass, who at the time was the most photographed man in the country.
19th century.
In the 19th century.
And Frederick Douglass is someone who's near and dear to my heart. And you can see that he has a very important role to play in Boston. The Meeting House is this place of action among the abolitionists, as Christian is talking about. So people like Douglass especially are coming in and speaking. And Frederick Douglass in many respects is regarded as one of the leaders of the community nationally. And so he's very important as we are not only dealing with the issue of emancipation, but also what to do when you freed millions of people. Slavery no longer exists. What's next? And that's what's incredibly important.
How did William Cooper Nell and Anna Dickinson aid the cause?
Well, you know, William Cooper Nell is, we regard him as one of the first Black historians in really maintaining that story. And, you know, his house is actually across from the Meeting House and is very important to how we tell the story. You know, I'll let Christian talk a little bit more about Anna Dickinson because I know he holds her near and dear.
Yes, certainly. And so Anna Dickinson, she was present at the Jubilee celebrations in 1863, but she was also a speaker, an orator. And one of the things she makes note of is that there cannot be compromise at the end of the war. And I'm paraphrasing here, but she gets up there because these folks, as they're celebrating freedom and the Emancipation Proclamation, they recognize that this work is undone and that the war is still unfolding across the country.
It's so important to know these names from history, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It is. And I think it's important for us to realize that there are so many people who were making sacrifices, pulling their money together, and anxiously waiting to see what the country was going to do and what we were going to look like at the end of the war.
The proclamation paved the way for Black men to fight for the Union Army in the Union Army, enabling the liberated to become liberators. Christian, tell us about some of the men who fought from Massachusetts.
Absolutely. And so the African Meeting House was actually the recruitment site of the 54th Regiment in the Union Army. And so that was the first Black all-voluntary unit. And so this was very essential in pushing the movement forward because the infusion of Black soldiers in the Union Army helped us pave the way to Juneteenth. That was critical. But the meeting House was a site for recruitment, and you have folks like William Cooper Nell who were recruiting Black soldiers in the community because people were fervent and eager to help aid the cause.
And we just saw some video of the reenactors marching up Beacon Street to the Robert Gould Shaw monument, the Shaw Memorial, that was rededicated just a few years ago in honor of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. More history here in Boston, right?
Yes, Boston's full of it.
So, Noel, some congratulations are in order. The museum just received a prestigious grant from the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund for the Nantucket location. Tell us about that and how the funds are going to be used.
So this is a capital improvement grant, and this is from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This is going to allow us to do some essential work to make sure that that site is maintained in place. And so we're looking at not only the windows, but conservation for the interior of the building as well. And so we're very excited that the National Trust saw the value of the story and keeping this story and this place preserved for future generations.
Now, Noel, you've joined the museum from the National Civil Rights Museum. What do you hope to achieve here in Boston?
You know, Boston is home to me. It is the first place I called home. I was born here. So my goal is to build on the tremendous legacy that has been laid before me. The museum is over 50 years old. There have been tremendous work that has been done. And so my goal with wonderful people like Christian and the rest of the team is to elevate the story and bring it to a regional and national audience.
All right, Noel Trent, President and CEO of the Museum of African American History on Beacon Hill and Nantucket, and Christian Walks, also a Bostonian, right?
Absolutely.
Director of Education and Interpretation. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, don't forget, the exhibit is called The Emancipation Proclamation, A Pragmatic Compromise, and it's now on view at the Museum of African American History on Beacon Hill. Now, the MFA is offering free admission tomorrow in honor of Juneteenth. There are several events and activities, including drop pottery decorating, inspired by the Hear Me Now, the Black Potters of Old Edgefield, South Carolina exhibit. There's a resource fair along with Just Joy Story Time. Free admission to the MFA is on a first-come, first-served basis, and WCVB is a proud partner of the MFA. Up next, celebrating and elevating Black artists. We have a preview of the Boston Art and Music Soul Festival and the inspiration behind the BAMS Fest. That's when Cityline continues.